Good evening. On behalf of the Student Academy of Doctors of Audiology, I would like to welcome you to today's Student Practice Management webinar, Legislation and Regulation. My name is Stephanie Chayeski, and I am pleased to serve as today's course moderator. I have just a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. If you have any technical challenges during the session, please use the chat feature to make me aware, and I will be glad to assist you. Please type your questions into the question queue and they will be addressed by the presenter at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be available for online viewing next week. At this time, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's course leader, Dr. Alicia Spohr. Alicia Spohr, AUD, is the audiologist and owner of Designer Audiology. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from Michigan State University after completing internship rotations at Bethesda National Naval Medical Center, Fort Belvoir, and Kendall Demonstration Elementary School. Dr. Spohr completed fourth-year externship at the Mayo Clinic, Arizona, and earned her Doctor of Audiology degree from Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. After graduation, Alicia joined the hearing aid and cochlear implant teams at Mayo Clinic before moving back to Maryland. She worked at two Maryland-based private practices before opening her own business. Dr. Spohr is the current legislative chair for the Maryland Academy of Audiology and past president of the Academy of Doctors of Audiology. Thank you, Dr. Spohr.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Ms. Chayeski, for that. And I appreciate you being on the call and everyone joining me tonight. So I apologize if you're one of my former students, because I think that this is going to be very similar to what you've probably already heard. And I think at any point in time, Ms. Chayeski, if you would like to chime in, you're more than welcome to, because you probably know this just as well, if not better, than the majority of audiologists that are out there. So with that, I am happy to be here tonight. First off, I do want to say thank you to SATA for having me again. And this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. In case you haven't seen me pre-COVID weight, this is what I do look like. And this is me on one of my many lobbying days. I do try to walk the walk and talk the talk that we are going to talk about today. And you can see some of my disclosures, but I will have to say that I love doing the lobbying side of things. It's a big mix in my day. It's something different during the week. It keeps me on my toes. It keeps me informed. And I can tell you that as a young audiologist and as a student member back during the NAFTA days when I was paired with my ADA mentor, that I adamantly said I never was going to do politics, just like I was never going to be in private practice and I was never going to be an owner. And I think part of the reason why I didn't like it, which hopefully will shed a little bit of some light and a light bulb will go off for a lot of you, is that a lot of people think of the politics that occur at work, and it's you can't talk to this person because they're mad at that, and you can't go to this department and use your doctor title because they don't like this, and that color's blue but you want to use black, and all of those little tiny ordeals that a lot of people will say are politics throughout the day. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at your profession that you're going into and how this is going to affect what you plan to do for the rest of your professional career. And I can tell you that it is affecting you every single day, regardless of if you know what's happening or not. So hopefully you will be a little more informed at the end of the hour. And if any of you are in the Washington, Baltimore, DC area, I would love to have you come join me when we can actually start doing this again. And I'm sure many of my students who are now audiologists that are doing this at the state level and at the national level, when they come in, would also be happy to have you tag along as well. So with that, let's look at a little bit about what we are going to go through and speak to tonight. Whoops, my computer is a little bit slower than I want, but let's see. Okay, so I really tried to divvy this up. There's about 500 things I would like to tell you today, and there's no way I can speak quickly enough to get through all of it. So I've really divided it into three sections, and it is a lot of legislation as opposed to regulation, but I tried to put a few things in there. You'll see the topic section on your own. I do get a lot of questions about what is a PAC? Why do we have PACs? Tell me about the hearing aid tax credit, which is not currently in Congress. Tell me about the Department of Labor issues. And so I tried to put some information towards the end so that when you're reviewing this, you can go through and look at it and share it and at least have a starting base so that you can move forward and do some more research. And again, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts today, I would like to ask you, and I don't actually have my form up here, how many of you actually know who had the idea for your Doctor of Audiology degree? And it's amazing to me how many of my students and how many audiologists to this point have no idea where the AUD degree came from. And you would think that somebody who's going into this profession would be curious and would know that so that you can understand where it falls within the grand scheme of doctoral degrees, how it's so young and so new, and what type of work we have to do related to that AUD. But I would say that I am a little biased. I think ADA has a great history of the AUD degree on their website, which you can see here, which is simply audiologist.org. And I would highly recommend that you start off by reading it. It's only 3 or 4 paragraphs, so it's not very difficult, but it really gives you a starting point as to where some of the organizations were, where this came from, and this is where a lot of the political movement started. And you're going to think education isn't political, and I'm here to tell you that it very much is. And then the next thing is that we talk about ourselves as a doctoring profession, and we are all hopefully working to strive to be the best audiologists we can be. And we talk a lot about evidence-based practices and best practices and patient care and continuum of care and interprofessional collaboration. But what do you really need to do to be a doctoring profession when you're an audiologist? And if you don't know the answer to that, again, this looks really strange because you're going to see ADA's former logo there. And this is from the Feedback magazine, which was the precursor to Audiology Practices. And there was a great article originally written by George Osborne, as you see there. PCO School of Audiology is now Salus University and the George Osborne School of Audiology. And it's, again, a very simple 2 to 3 page article about what you actually need to do to become a doctoring profession. And Dr. Osborne really talks about 7 different steps, and we have not completed all of them. So the next time you have 30 minutes free, which I understand is not a lot of extra time, especially if you're in your 4th year, if you're in your 3rd year, if you're working on your research project. But if I can take 30 minutes and make a PowerPoint and speak with you tonight, I would ask that you take 30 minutes and look at these 2 resources. So with that, I think we have all probably heard this quote before from Tip O'Neill, who's a former Speaker of the House: all politics is local. And I'm not sure that that's grammatically correct, but I'm going to go with it tonight. But all politics is local. And if you're not sure whether or not that's true, I would highly recommend that you look at what is going on in your community and how the community flows up into your national level. So I want to start with kind of that local side of things and speak to the audiology scope of practice. So the scope of practice for audiology does vary from state to state because, as you hear many audiologists say, it is a state-defined scope of practice, and many states need to have an update made to their scope of practice. And guess who gets to make these changes. It's not your national association. It's not myself as a past president. It's not the people that you're going to elect when you vote in your next AAA, ASHA, ADA, or National Association elections. It is you. The people who need to make changes at the state level are the people within the state where those changes are actually going to make a difference. So this is why your state association is so important. If you don't have a state association, which almost all 50 of them have a dedicated audiology program, not all 50 do, but most of them do. But if you don't and you want to start one, I know of quite a few different people that would be interested in helping you get that program started. And if you don't belong to your state association, please pay your dues. It is almost always less than $100 to be a member at your state level. And if you have the time and the talent and the treasure, this is where you should be volunteering and this is where you should be donating. And I say that as somebody who loves doing my national side too, but this is where you're going to make an actual difference. And the reason for that is because if your state makes a change, you are licensed within that state and your national association cannot help you at all. And so I think Stephanie actually said this in a really great way to some students that were fortunate enough to hear her speak. We'll talk about MASSA, which is a national piece of legislation, but even if MASSA gets passed, if you in your state cannot do sermon management and sermon removal, it doesn't matter if MASSA gets passed and sermon removal is a covered service. You in your state cannot do it because you're licensed within that state, and that state restricts, I couldn't think of the right word, that state restricts what you are actually able to do. So if you want to make a change to your scope of practice and what you can and cannot do, you start at your state level. And a national licensure law doesn't do you any good unless you connect it at the state level. And this is another reason why you have state lobbyists. Full disclosure, you saw a couple slides ago, I do a lot of work on the Maryland side for our state association, and not nearly enough audiologists join and not nearly enough audiologists donate. But I have a strong belief that my state licensure law needs to be very good, not only so I can set some examples for other states, but so that I can work to my full scope of practice with my AUD degree. And so I have to make sure that diagnose and treat is in there. I have to make sure hearing and balance, including tinnitus, is referenced somewhere. I have to make sure sermon management is in there and our operative monitoring, that I am considered medical and or non-surgical, and that evaluation management codes, which are a possibility in some of your states when they are legal to do, so that they are in there as well. And you are the only ones that can make these changes. And I sidetracked, I apologize. This is what you get for having me at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, is that this is why your state lobbyists are so important. The lobbyists are the ones that are actually in these hearings. They're in your state chambers. They are in there looking at the legislation. They are seeing what is happening. They are the ones that you pay to be your eyes and ears at that state level. So when you want something done, you reach out and work with them, and you pay them for their legal and regulatory expertise. And you also pay them to monitor your state to make sure there's not any infringement or issues going on that are going to affect you in a negative way. Your state lobbyists are likely worth anything that you're paying them. And as you'll hear from a lot of the states that have really strong associations, they're not cheap. I can tell you in the state of Maryland, we pay somewhere between $18,000 and $25,000 a year for our lobbyist. And I think that that's a steal because I work them pretty hard. But all of that comes from convention revenue, dues, and donations. So if you want to make a difference, this is how you do it. And if you think $18,000 to $25,000 is a lot of money, I would ask you to take a look at your salary and what your starting salary is expected to be, and determine how much your licensure law is worth for that salary that you're getting, and there is a value there. The other thing that I really want to point out, which is so important with your state, is that if you are in a state and you think, oh, yeah, I can do sermon management because I've read my statutes and my statutes don't say that I can't do it. Just because something says that you can't do it doesn't mean that you can do it. So I often make the comment, just because my licensure law doesn't say I can't do cochlear implant surgery doesn't mean I can go into the operating room and do cochlear implant surgery. My licensure law says what I can do, and if it doesn't address something, then I have to ask in writing whether or not it's something that I can actually do. And until you get that answer and until you get it in writing, then the answer is no, you may not do it. So if you don't know if you can diagnose and treat, which many states do not have, at this point in time, then you cannot diagnose and treat. Now you need to ask your state licensure board, excuse me, if diagnose and treat is synonymous with evaluate and manage in your state licensure law. But if the answer is yes, then I would encourage you to make a simple change because we are a diagnosing and treating profession. But if the answer is no, then you need to go in and make that change. So enough on my state soapbox. Hopefully you will all join at your state level, and it is usually a lot cheaper for students, and oftentimes you can get somebody to sponsor you as well, get you involved, and then you can move forward and become a full-fledged professional member when you have your AUD degree. So, oh, whoops, here's my mistake. So the Audiology Interstate Compact. So I apologize, this slide should read that we currently have 6 in that second paragraph and bullet, and so I will change that and send it before this PowerPoint gets uploaded. But the Interstate Compact is something that was really started quite a few years ago. There is a national association, and I can't think of its acronym because it is very long, and their only not their only goal, but one of their main goals has been to have a compact started. And so a compact is something that multiple states agree to, and once those states sign on to this compact agreement, it means that you as a licensed professional in any one of those states that joins the compact can perform either in-person or telehealth services over or within these different states. So for example, if Texas and Oklahoma are part of a compact, if you are licensed in Texas, it means that you can provide telehealth services, or you could actually cross the border and provide in-person services in Oklahoma using your Texas licensure, and vice versa. So when there is a compact, it just says that these states have all agreed, and those audiology professionals can move from one to the other without having to be relicensed in that state. So a lot of different professions have compacts. Obviously, the most common is medicine. The physicians are moving from one state to another without having to get a different licensure. Nursing has one, physical therapy has one, there's lots of them. During times of emergency, especially when natural disaster occurs, they will often have like emergency relief licensure, which is kind of similar to a compact where if you are licensed somewhere else, you can come in and provide those services in those states where there are national natural disasters. At this point in time with the COVID-19 pandemic, we do have some states of emergency in a lot of parts of the country. And so they are allowing some licensed professionals to work as if there was a compact in place, meaning people in Delaware can actually provide services to those who live in Maryland as long as they're licensed on that side. The big thing that I'm going to skip to the bullet number 3 is that when you're a part of a compact, that you have to abide by the licensure laws in the state where that patient is. So the state that you have to be licensed in is the state where the patient is actually physically located. So again, I'm on the East Coast. If I'm in Massachusetts, which is a very small state, and somebody is in Connecticut, I can't just provide services to somebody in Connecticut because they typically drive to see me in Massachusetts, but they're at home and I want to remotely program their hearing aid. It doesn't work that way. Where the patient is where you need to be licensed. So if they're in your same state, it's perfectly fine. If they are in the next state over, or if they are snowbirds and they're south or north, or if they are on vacation and you are not licensed in that state, you cannot provide any type of services to them. I don't care who tells you why or what, that is the actual law. Um, so with the compact, it would take care of a lot of those different things. In order for the compact to come into fruition, 10 states have to join and have that compact language in their licensure. And again, currently have 6. So I was following Debbie Abel and maybe a little Debbie Downer. When I wrote the PowerPoint, we currently have 6 and we need 10 to get going. So hopefully if this is of interest to you, you can start to work at this at your state level. But again, remember where the patient is where you would need to be licensed, or that state would have to be part of a compact that your state is involved in, and that you also have to abide by what services can be covered, which is why we go back to this screen here. If you can't do sermon management in your state, and all of a sudden if you can do sermon management in your state and you are in the compact with somebody else and that state does not allow for sermon management, it doesn't mean you get to go in and do everything that your state allows. It means that when you cross over that state line, that you have to agree to those services that can be provided by those licensure laws. So ideally, in the best case scenario, all 50 states and the District of Columbia would have the exact same licensure law. It would be phenomenal because we could get the best things out of every single state. But then we wouldn't have to worry about, oh, can I do this in this state? Or can I write diagnosis on my report without, being in trouble with their licensure law? Is interoperative monitoring something I can do here or something not I can't do? All those things would be taken care of. But until that's actually the case, this is how we're bound. So this is kind of the next step up in the professionals hierarchy at the state level. So a couple things that are coming up at the state level or not a couple, this is one of the big things. I already gave you a list of bullets before, but this is the topic that I've heard the most about, which is actually what Maryland is starting to work on as well. And so there are currently 20 states that have some form of either an audiology assistant or an audiologist assistant. And I'm not here to debate the merits of which name you think it should be. And I do know that ADA has their preferred version, but depending on which organization you look to and which licensure laws, you may hear them referred to as one or the other. A number of states are in the process of adding assistants to their statute, which again, I just mentioned Maryland is starting to look at this. I know that Washington State is starting to look at it, and kudos to Texas, who actually just recently did it, and they have some really good language as well. So if you're looking to go down this path, I would highly recommend starting to look at Texas. But the legislation around audiologist assistants is really looking at how we can expand audiology as a profession and have multiple hands going at the same time. So I think dentistry does this really well. Oftentimes you will have one dentist and he or she will have 5 or 6 or maybe 2 or 3 hygienists working. And so they're doing the routine teeth cleanings, they're taking x-rays, they're putting fluoride on, whatever that might be. And then they have dental assistants who are coming in and sterilizing their equipment, handing things off, assisting the dentist when they do some form of root canal or any type of procedure that requires a little bit more education and time that dentist is actually providing. So that dentist actually has 2 layers working under him or her. And so this is kind of the role of an assistant, is that it would allow for that assistant to do any services that the audiologist asked him or her to do within reason. They can't go off and do a hearing test on their own because that does require some more education and training. You do have to decide at the state level how those assistants are going to be logged or classified within the state level. So are they going to be licensed? Are they going to be certified? Are they going to be registered? Are they going to be none of the above? What might be there? What type of education you want them to have? Background checks, lack thereof, criminal records, things along those lines. ASHA just put out their audiologist assistant language a couple weeks ago, and you can take a read at that. It's only about 4 pages long as well, and everybody has different opinions. The one that you need to do is what's best for your state. So your state board should be looking at that and determining what's best for the audiologists in their state. And then you have to determine if those assistants need continuing education. How many requirements do you ask of the supervising audiologist? How many assistants can one audiologist actually pay attention to? If you have 3 of them all doing hearing aid clean-in checks and you're doing a hearing test, what happens if one of the clean-in checks goes poorly and now you have a broken hearing aid? Can you still take care of your patient plus 2 other assistants at the same time? Or is there no limit or a very limited number of assistants? And how are you supervising them? Are you watching them? Are you in the office? Things along those lines. And then what liability is going to be there? Because again, remember, at the state level, your state association is actually working to advance your profession. At your state level, your board of examiners, your licensing board is actually working to protect the patient. So you have to figure out what is going to be best for you as an audiologist, but what is also going to be best for the patient and how will it be safe in how it's implemented. So again, there's lots of different state things that happen at any one given time. I can think of about 5 or 6 different ways that states are constantly fighting from infringement type of issues, but I tried to keep this PowerPoint at least in a way of things that you could do in ways that we can move forward as opposed to just trying to block some other professions. Don't get me wrong, it's important, but I'm trying to think of ways that we can look forward. This probably shows my age because this was on TV in the limited 5 channels we got when I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Michigan. But if you have 3 minutes, this is a really great YouTube video that is from Schoolhouse Rock that talks about how a bill becomes a law. And this is true on both the state and national side. And this is obviously you can see as Washington, D.C., but it's a really catchy tune. So I apologize, any of you that now have an earworm in your head with Schoolhouse Rock. I apologize. Any of you who haven't seen it, you're going to watch it maybe 4 times to get all of it, and then you're going to be singing this song all week. So I will definitely know who's been watching these presentations the next time we all get together based on who's singing Schoolhouse Rock. If you are not going to watch Schoolhouse Rock, this is kind of the steps that it takes a bill to become a law. And the reason why I think this is so important is because I feel like many people who haven't gone out and actually done it don't quite understand the process that things go through. So again, this is very similar on both the state and national side, but when you have a piece of legislation, it gets drafted and often proposed to a member of your state or national government from an organization. So while I think ADA is the greatest organization, we do not introduce the legislation. We might write it up. We give it to a member of Congress, or as a state association, you would give it to a member of your state House or Senate. They will often put it through some sort of legislative committee or draft committee, somebody that actually marks it up exactly the way that it needs to be done so that it can be presented as a piece of legislation. So when you read MASSA, you're going to look at the text and think this doesn't make as much sense as I think it could, and it's just because it has to be written in a certain way. That's also true at the state level. You have to strike out, you have to add in, you have to remove, and there's a very specific way for things to be done. So when you find a champion, which is really going to be your member or members that are going to not only introduce the piece of legislation, but also hopefully promote it so that it moves through and gets passed, those champions are going to be the ones that are going to do that formal legislative language request. And it's often their staff member or that committee that they're working with to give you the final approval. And then your champions are your main sponsor. So typically you're going to have one or two champions on each chamber, and a chamber is either the House or the Senate. And you're going to have original co-sponsors and then co-sponsors as well. So your original co-sponsors are just those members who want to support it from day one. And then co-sponsors are going to be the people that you add to that piece of legislation who are in support as the time goes on. So you might introduce a bill with just one champion and that's it, or you might introduce it with two champions, maybe a Republican and a Democrat, and 8 original co-sponsors, because you just have that many people who are interested in what you're doing. After the piece of legislation is introduced, it goes to a committee, and each state and your national Congress have committees of jurisdiction. And what that means is, depending on what topic it is, it will go to the committee group that's best suited to hear that. So again, because we're going to talk about MASSA in a few minutes, for MASSA, when the legislation goes to the House of Representatives, all Medicare related bills go to Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means. So it's actually two committees that split that Medicare. And depending on which committee member you talk to or which one of our lobbyists you talk to, one of them has a little more clout than the other. But we go to ENC and Ways and Means. And then on the Senate side, our MASSA legislation is going to go to Finance. So you really have to determine where your piece of legislation is going to go, what committee it's going to go to, and you want to find a champion that is best suited in that committee. And depending on the committee, they might have subcommittees. So if there's a subcommittee on health, or if there's a subcommittee on taxation, or if there's a subcommittee on education, you want to make sure that you're getting a champion who's going to be able to work that piece of legislation through the entire process. So it wouldn't be helpful to have somebody who's in agricultural committees introduce a Medicare bill, because they may not be able to move it forward as well as somebody who's on the health subcommittee related to Medicare. After it passes committee, legislation goes to the floor for a vote, and this happens in both chambers. And in case you don't know, a chamber is half of your government. It's the Senate, it's the House, it's at the state level, it's usually the Senate and the delegates, which is the version of the House of Representatives, and you have to have a vote to either move forward or deny it. At that point in time, if both chambers have voted upon your piece of legislation, then it has to be reconciled. So if the language is different, if there's different text, if it got marked up a little differently and something was added in the House side but not on the Senate side, then it has to come together and be in the same piece of wording before it can be final. So you may introduce on both the House and the Senate. You may introduce on only one and not the other. And if you introduce on the Senate and it passes the Senate, it moves to the House, and vice versa. But either way, if you have two pieces of legislation, they have to be the same before they can actually be signed into law. You'd think that'd be common sense, but it's not always. And then last but not least, the president or the governor provides his or her signature, and that's what actually makes the piece of legislation become a bill, or sorry, the piece of legislation become a law. Now, there's all sorts of things around vetoing power and everything else, but that's a little beyond what we're going to talk about today. And if you absolutely love this stuff, then a couple pre-law classes might be for you as well. A couple other things that I hear from audiologists and students when we talk about legislation, and hopefully a few misconceptions that I can clear up for you. These are all related to the national piece of legislation. So I'm talking about our US Senate and our US House of Representatives. But congressional terms at the national level are 2 years in length, and we are currently in the 116th congressional term, which is occurring from January 1, 2019 to December 31st, 2020. So some people get a little confused when we say we're talking about the 116th or the 114th, and that's just related to what congressional session it is, as opposed to the fact that they're 2-year terms. Do not get the congressional terms mixed up with your election cycles, which may or may not be the same. It seems like in America we don't do anything easily. So congressional terms are not necessarily what your electoral terms are, but they could coincide. At the end of each congressional term, all of the bills die, and I realize that might be a little harsh term right now, but it essentially means that if you have legislation introduced, like we have MASSA in both the House and the Senate side, on December 31st, 2020, if that piece of legislation has not passed, it just kind of goes away. So bills are not carried over from one term to the next, and you're going to see a quick example of that in a couple slides. Because things just don't flow over, you have to start the process all over again. And you'd think, well, I already had this, so it'll be easy to get it back in the second time, but that's not always true. And sometimes it's harder to get in the 8th time as it was the second time. So, so just know that come December 31st, when we ring in the new year, all of your legislative team goes to work again because they have to start the process all over again. And this is a question that I noticed that ADA's lobbyist gets very often during the member meeting when they have an advocacy update, is what is the number of co-sponsors you need to get a piece of legislation either moved out of the committee or onto the floor to get it passed. And there is no magic number. So you might have a piece of legislation that has one champion and nobody else, and it gets signed into law. Or you might have a piece of legislation that has hundreds of co-sponsors on both chambers and still doesn't get passed into law. So there is no magic number. You'd like to think that the more people you can get on your side, the more people you can have that are passionate about it, the better it will move. But again, that's not always true. So this is why looking at who you are working with in addition to how many people you're working with makes such a big difference. One thing that we talk about all the time, and this comes up over and over again, and you're going to hear about it quite a bit this month, we hope, is the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act. Now, let me let me assure you, this has passed. Anybody who doesn't think it's passed is living pre-2017. This piece of legislation has passed. So if you want to read the actual bill text, I wrote it there for you, HR 1652 and Senate Bill 670. And yeah, this has passed. So this is related to creating the new category of over-the-counter hearing aids that the Food and Drug Administration is going to do. It is for wireless air conduction hearing aids. It is intended for use for adults age 18 and older. It is for perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. These devices will be available over the counter without the involvement of a licensed professional. And the reason why I threw this on here is because we are set, according to the legislation, we should be seeing the draft FDA proposals for OTC hearing aids this month, August of 2020. So you can keep your eyes open for that. It is coming. It's something you should be aware of. I, for one, am very excited for it, and I can give you my own personal opinions later on. But when those proposed rules come out, there will be a comment period. That comment period is available for anybody to make comments, any organizations, patients, providers, anybody. But I would remind you to think about how this could be good for the profession, how it's good for the patient, how you would benefit from it, just like you might benefit from glasses or Tylenol or knee braces, and about how this could move things forward. After the comments close, we will have 6 months and then the regulations will be finalized. So again, I don't want to dwell a lot on past legislation, but I do want you to be aware of this because I think that this will become a hot topic. And we can all talk about something different in August rather than who was or wasn't wearing their mask and when we're going to get to travel again because I miss seeing people during the COVID pandemic. The other piece of legislation that I would like to bring up, which is also national, is the Fit to Serve legislation. So this was done, no, I didn't even write the year on it, and I didn't write the year on it when I was creating the PowerPoint either. This was passed, I also believe, back in 2016, 2017. I'm sure Ms. Chayaski is shaking her head right now because I was part of some of these things and I don't remember the exact time frame. But this allows the VA system to appoint hearing aid specialists within their system for um, um, for services that they are able to provide. So a hearing aid specialist is providing testing and fitting and care around treatment with the use of a hearing aid. And again, this was passed. This has come back into the light a little bit, and I've seen a couple things on the Facebook pages. But before you let your emotions jump in, I would encourage you to read it. Ironically, I didn't give you the information or the house number, but I did give you the website later on, and you can type in Fit to Serve and pull it up. But probably not to anybody's surprise, this was done with the International Hearing Society and AAO-HNS, which are ear, nose, and throat surgeons. So as you will see in just a minute, you need to look very carefully at what national associations are supporting and opposing pieces of legislation. You need to determine where you best line up within that, and you need to make a professional home for yourself. So you should have a professional state home. It might be your audiology organization, might be your audiology speech language association. It might be something else, it might be your HLAA chapter, who knows, or a combination. And then you need to find your professional home because they're all going to give you different things at different levels. Now, if you want to know what the playbook is, the playbook was actually published back in 2017. It's not the How I Met Your Mother playbook, but the playbook was actually published by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and this is it right here. If you have not read this book, or at least the recommendations, I highly recommend that you do so. You can find this on nationalacademies.org, and you can purchase it or you can download it. There are 12 recommendations that came out of this work group, which included a variety of professionals as well as panelists and testimonials. And it's a 4-page summary. So again, not very difficult. But if you want to know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, this is where we have seen a lot of movement from. And the first thing I can tell you is at one point, I still remember the high fives when the FDA decided to no longer enforce the medical waiver for the fit of a hearing aid. It was at one of these National Academy meetings, and that was part of one of the recommendations. One of the recommendations also talks about over-the-counter hearing aids coming to market, and the President's Council had a little bit of a role in that, I'm sure, as well too. So if you want to see where some things might be going, this would be a really great read. Again, a couple hundred pages if you want to read it front to back. If you want to look at the recommendations, that would be very helpful for you as well. So hopefully, as a SATA member or as an early career audiologist or as a full fellow audiologist, you are all aware of the Medicare Audiologist Access and Services Act, or what most of us will just call MASA, because saying all of that over and over again gets pretty tiring. But I want to go a little bit about why we are at the point we are with MASA, and hopefully this will be a review, but maybe it'll get you excited and help you understand some history and help us move it forward, because again, we're working on our deadline of December 31st. And again, if you're not sure where this came from, this all ties back to George Osborne and his original piece that was published back in the Feedback magazine that I showed you at the very beginning of this PowerPoint. So we're going to start kind of in a chronological order. Sorry. We're going to start with the American Academy of Audiology, which is our colleagues at AAA. Back in 2007, they introduced on the House and the Senate side back in November um, a piece of legislation that most of us would call direct access. And this is the legislation that would remove the required physician order for Medicare Part B beneficiaries prior to seeing an audiologist for any medically necessary hearing or balance services, diagnostic services. So they introduced this in 2007. In 2008, the congressional session ended and they had 107 co-sponsors on the House side and 6 co-sponsors on the Senate side. So, right, almost a quarter of the House was on this legislation and it died. So in 2009, they reintroduced it, same champion, Mike Ross, but it didn't get introduced until June of 2009. So that tells you same legislation, same champion, still took them 6 months to get back on the floor. No Senate side. In 2010, the session ended and they had 85 co-sponsors. 2011, they reintroduced it again. Again, Representative Mike Ross was the champion. It got introduced on June 3rd, 2011. So you can see things don't happen as quickly as sometimes we think they do. And in 2012, it was reintroduced by a different champion on the Senate side, Robert Menendez, in May of 2012. The session ended with 63 co-sponsors in the House and 1 co-sponsor in the Senate. So this is your direct access piece that AAA has been working on since 2007, which really means that they've probably been working on it for 3, 4, 5, 6 years before that to get all the moving pieces together. And after 2012, we hadn't seen much of it since then. So enter ADA. And back when ADA came about in 2012, we had something called the Audiology Patient Choice Act, or APCA, which most people refer to as 18 by 18. And that's when the board brought it to membership. And I will throw a big shout out to the late Eric Hegberg, who at the time when it was announced raised more than $150,000 at that convention to move forward with APCA. So let's hope we can beat that number in his honor. But 2012, 18 by 18, again, it didn't just happen in November. Your board was working on this long before it was announced. 2013, Prime Policy, who is the lobbying group, came on, and APCA was introduced in July of 2014. So you can already see right there, we're 2 years into it, by Lynn Jenkins and Matt Cartwright in the House. And it ended congressional session with 2 co-sponsors. 2015, same 2 co-sponsors, reintroduce it in May. So again, doesn't happen overnight. Session ends in 2016 with 21 co-sponsors. 2017, Tom Rice and Matt Cartwright take over, because just because they're a champion for you doesn't mean they don't have a life. Some people retire, some people lose their elections. There are multiple reasons why you might change champions. And in 2018, Elizabeth Warren and Rand Paul introduced the Senate version of APCA. So at that time, 2018, the legislation ends with 33 House co-sponsors and 2 Senate co-sponsors. That's a lot of labor between Stephanie and myself in those times, but moving along. Then we've got ASHA. So ASHA has what we often refer to as comprehensive benefits. And this is their piece of legislation that would allow audiologists to provide some auditory treatment services, vestibular services, and interoperative monitoring for hearing and balance care. There are some caveats that I'm not going to go through all of those. But this is essentially a different way of getting to the end goal. So comprehensive benefits was introduced by Bill Arrakis in June of 2013. Session ends in 2014 with 28 co-sponsors. reintroduced by Bill Arrakis again in February of 2015. So they got out there pretty early at that congressional session, and then ends in 2016 with 39 co-sponsors. So this is your comprehensive benefits legislation. Now, why is all of that important? Well, it's important because all three of those pieces, direct access, comprehensive benefits, and the tenets of APCA, came together when the organization started working together and formed what is now MASA, or MASA. So this is legislation that's supported by the three big national associations. And in 2019, it was introduced, same champions as APCA, Tom Rice and Matt Cartwright, in July of 2019. And it's, as I mentioned, in Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means. And the Senate bill was introduced by Elizabeth Warren and Rand Paul in September of 2019, and it's currently in the Finance Committee. We have 64 co-sponsors in the House and 8 co-sponsors in the Senate as of about midnight last night. So unless somebody signed on today, those are your current numbers. Again, we're working towards a deadline at the congressional session of December 31st. So anything we can do to move this forward, get it voted on in the committee, out on the floor and voted on, reconciled, and to the president's desk before New Year's Eve would be fantastic. So you look at all this and you think, okay, well, you know, AAA's been working on things for a year and or a decade and a half, and ADA's been working on things for 8 years, and ASHA's been working on things for a few years, but you know, legislation takes a long time. Let me give you an example of legislation taking a long time. Oh, this isn't even it. I'm sorry, but all that build up and it's not even what I was going to talk about. I was referring to the hearing aid tax credit, which I moved to the end of the PowerPoint, so you can go look at that. But the hearing aids tax credit has almost 2 decades worth of information on it. So I apologize again, all that build up and you get nothing out of it. So smile and shake your head and move forward with me. So last piece of legislation that I kind of want to show you is the Medicare Hearing Aid Act of 2019. And a lot of people, again, are talking about this, not to be confused with over-the-counter hearing aids. So this piece of legislation was introduced originally as HR 4618, and it got added to a bill, HR 3. And typically the smaller the bill number, the earlier it was introduced. So 4618 was the 4,618th piece of legislation on the House side because it starts with H for House, and it got added to HR 3, which is bill number 3. They don't always go exactly in that order, but a lot of times they do. Now, your national associations worked really hard because when this 4618 came out, there were a couple things in it that related to hearing aids. And when you read it, you thought, well, there's no way an audiologist was consulted on this. So after some very fast and quick negotiations and some wordsmithing, HR 3, which passed the House, includes oral rehabilitation when provided by an audiologist. It has hearing aids as prosthetic devices. It does provide coverage every 5 years for profound or severe hearing loss in one or both ears for hearing aids. It is not meant to cover OTC hearing aids. The hearing aids must be provided by an audiologist, and there were a couple amendments. And it requires HHS, which is Medicare, to complete a study on direct access. So this has passed the House. It's currently sitting on the Senate side because, again, if the legislation is passed on one side, one chamber, it goes to the other one. And as of right now, the Senate hasn't done anything with it. So this was a very big hoopla when this came about at the beginning of the year, end of last year. Again, time kind of runs together when you're down on Capitol Hill, but I know I was wearing a coat, so it must have been in the winter. And we'll see if this actually goes anywhere. If it passes the House and doesn't go anywhere in the Senate, on December 31st, it's done. So this is also something that you kind of want to keep your eye out on. And again, your national associations are putting information out to you, sometimes a little faster than they should be. They need to take a minute and read everything. But your national associations are giving you information when you need to be aware of something. So if you're not reading your emails, shame on you, because they are trying to tell you what you need to know. So I don't want, right? I don't want to get political on a legislative and regulatory presentation. This isn't about Democrats and Republicans. We can agree to disagree. You may not even fall into the DNR. You may be independent. You may be something else. But I didn't tell you the dates, and I didn't tell you all this information for you to have to save it and regurgitate it on a test, but I did want to bring your attention to some of it because you can look all this information up. And I think it's really important to look at how quickly or slowly things work, um, how things change based on organizations, and about how you can go about things in a slightly different way. And this goes back to making sure you have a home both at the state and national level. And you need to know where you are counted as a member. So numbers speak, right? When I can say that I'm with an organization that represents over 200,000 audiology and speech language pathologists, to a staffer, that's like, whoa, there's a lot of people. We all know there aren't 200,000 audiologists. There aren't even half that many audiologists. But on the same time, you need to know where you're counted, and you need to know where your money is going. So if you agree with something, put some money there, put some talent there, put some treasure there. And if you don't, make sure that you're not helping them in some other way. If you don't like the outcomes, you are the one that can change it. And I can only do so much as I go to DC. Stephanie can only do so much when she goes to DC. I'm going to take a pretty big stab and say that the two of us are in DC more than anybody else, from the ADA organization, which isn't a lot recently. And your lobbyists can only do so much too. We have to have numbers, and we have to have talent and treasure to go with it. So again, done with that soapbox. Back to MASA. So MASA really has three pieces. Anybody who's been with me, Dr. Greenaway, if you're on the phone, you can give this spiel just as much. This is your elevator speech. If you don't have an elevator speech for your profession, get one. This is your elevator speech for MASA. It really does three things. It eliminates the need for a physician order for a Medicare Part B beneficiary to have coverage for medically necessary hearing and balance services. It allows Medicare Part B beneficiaries to have coverage of medically necessary treatment services when allowed by state licensure laws. This is why everything goes back to your state, and that is so important. And it reclassifies audiologists from the diagnostic supplier or diagnostic other category as a practitioner within the Medicare system, commensurate with our level of education. That's it. That's your nutshell of MASA. So when you're talking to people and you want to get them to support it, and they say, well, what does this legislation do? That's what it does. You can say it in quite a few different ways. It rolls off my tongue all the time now. And I would highly recommend that you walk around and tell as many people, even if it's just your professors and your colleagues, all about it. Because the more people that know about it, the more interest we can have and move it forward. Now, I mentioned before, you can look all this information up and so much more. Congress.gov is a great way of keeping track of legislation. So when you go there at the top, which I've cut off on this one, but you can type in your legislative number, you can type in a keyword. Do not put in hearing for your keyword. Everybody has a hearing related to a bill. It doesn't mean auditory vestibular. It means something entirely different. So I would say don't put in Medicare. There's a lot of Medicare bills. You're going to see all types of different prescriptions and everything else. Be as specific as you can. Audiology, audiologist often will get you to places that you want to be. Hearing aids may or may not get you to where you want to be, but you can also look things up by congressional session. So you can see here with my mouse, I looked at the 116th because 4056 is MASA. And then you can see different things. It's introduced, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, went to the president, became law. And then you can look at the text, you can look at all these different things, including your co-sponsors and related bills. So if you're not sure if it has legislation in the opposite chamber, you can always look at it there. This is free, it's open, it's public. Feel free to peruse around congress.org as much as you want to. So with that, I want you to remember that all politics is local. I really want to say all politics are local. Um, but if you do nothing else, which hopefully you will, hopefully you have a short to-do list at this point, please remember to vote. Um, Voting is so important as to what we do at the state level and at the national level. And if you're not quite sure who to vote for, number one, I would encourage you to make an educated voting decision. But I think your national and state organizations could help point you in the right direction of people who have benefited what you believe in and put you in a place to find good information that will help you make that decision. Just in case you don't know, Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. It is the former date of Audacity. And unfortunately, since we're not doing Dallas this year, you can attend Audacity virtually in October and still actually make the polls by mail or in person, or however your state goes about doing it on November 3rd. So if you want to be more involved, I would highly recommend that you reach out to ADA. They're a great place to start. Audiologist.org. You can email ADA at info@audiologist.org. You could volunteer for a committee. We have quite a few advocacy committees. I will say that a lot of people will tell me that they just don't have time for it. And I ask them how much time a committee is, and they tell me they don't know. And so then I wonder, how do they know they don't have time for it? Things often move very slowly and then really quickly and then very slowly and then really quickly. So it can be very fast paced for a very short period of time, kind of like clinic can be, but I would highly encourage you to look for a committee that suits you the best. And I will tell you, it may not be regulatory and legislative, and that's okay. That's not for everybody, just like research is not for everybody, just like clinic is not for everybody. So find the one that speaks to you, that you're passionate about. And if it's not, or if it is, and you really want to help, I'm sure many of you saw the audiogram that came out today with an amazing tribute. I could only read about 4 of them until I got teary-eyed and had to stop because I can't be sobbing in the middle of my patient day. But consider donating to the Eric N. Hagberg Advocacy Fund. The Hagberg Advocacy Fund is how we can do a lot of these different things and continue to move legislation and audiology forward, and really continue in the light that Dr. Hagberg showed most of us, or all of us, and also working towards the memory of Dr. Osborne, who put all of this kind of into action as well. On the MASA side, if you would like to become more involved, and I'm always amazed at people think like, well, I can't give $100. And I know as a student, I do know some students who have given $100, and you know who you are. And thank you for that. You don't have to be public. $25 can make a big difference. If every student gave $25 towards their national association, we'd have quite a bit of money. I would consider just thinking about if every audiologist, licensed audiologist, gave $100, which is a very small amount considering what we are making and what you could go without for $100 to help move your profession forward. We would have a very large pack, and you can look at those numbers later on. But back to MASA, you can choose audiology.org. There you can send letters of support to your congressional members. If you don't know who your congressional members are, good time to learn. They might be up for election, and that will help you find that out too. But those letters are pre-formed, and you can adjust them as much as you want. So my family and friends and extended family and everybody else send those letters out periodically, including myself, and you'd be amazed at some of the responses you get back. And that can tell you a lot about how your legislative member views you as a constituent. You can donate to this movement. Again, we talked about the advocacy fund. You can also donate through that MASA website. You do not necessarily have to be an ADA member. So if your parents are just thrilled to give a lot of money now that you're finishing school, and maybe they did or didn't help fund that, this is another good way. And they may or may not be Medicare age sooner than some of us too. So that could be beneficial for them as well. And then I mentioned you can go to congress.gov for following bills and different things that are happening at your national level. Your state probably has a website as well. I just can't put all 50 states nor look them up, and I don't know them off the top of my head, so I apologize. But your advocacy chairs and your state presidents do. So when you become part of that, make sure you look that up as well. I do want to give a big shout out. You can see the Washington Monument just over the top of Ms. Chayefsky's head there. And I always think she's with Justin Amash, and I know that's wrong. So thank you for correcting me earlier with Thomas Massey, who you see here, who has been a supporter of MASSA and APCA. So with that, I am going to leave the last, let's see, I have another 6 slides, which were intended to give you some more information, but not for me to yammer on about it. So that is something for you to look into. You have my information. You can look me up. You have my information from other PowerPoints as well. But if you go to info@audiologist.org, that will certainly get you to the place you need to be and the persons that you need to talk to. So thank you for spending time with me. I'm happy to answer any questions, which I'm not sure that there are, Stephanie, but I will turn it back to you.
I do actually I have a couple of questions in the queue. One person would like to know, can you recommend some resources that might inspire people in certain states if they're looking to improve their state licensure laws? And so what I'm taking that to mean is, are there states that have really exceptional licensure laws that if someone were looking to model, they should look to those states?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'm so happy you're thinking about the state level. First and foremost, I would say that the national organizations, I know ADAs off the top of my head, all have model state licensure language. So you can go to your national associations. When I do state changes, I will try to get as much information as I can. So go to AAA, go to ASHA, go to ADA. Again, I'm biased. I might think that they have the best one, and download their model licensure language, model licensure law, and start there. After that, if you have a specific subject that you're looking into, I mentioned audiologist assistants. If you're trying to get into sermon management, whatever that might be, I would then try to reach out to many of your colleagues or state presidents that might have good information as well. I can tell you, again, I am a little biased. I can tell you that Texas has some really good licensure laws. Nobody's licensure law is perfect. Illinois has some pretty amazing ones, thanks to Dr. Kim Cavett up there. I'm going to toot Maryland a little bit more. Again, late Craig Johnson was amazing at putting some of our state licensure laws together. State of Florida has some really good state licensure laws. Again, nothing's perfect, but you can kind of look towards them as well. And if you're stuck and you need help finding something, I am happy to help. I have a really good guest that Adam Haley, who's at ADA headquarters, could really put you in touch with somebody that you needed to get that information as well. But start with the national levels, download those model licensures, figure out what you need to do, download your state licensures law, and then move forward from there. And I'm happy to help. So if I can do anything, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Thank you. That's great. The next question is related more to the federal legislation, and that is the way that Medicare sort of looks at audiology seems to have been a problem for like 30 years. So as we're thinking about MASA and the components of that, between direct access and practitioner status and expanded access to benefits, is there one of those things that is more important than others to achieve, in your view?
Do you want to answer this, Stephanie? um,
I will be glad to tell you what I think and what I think ADA's position would be.
I am happy to, I'll answer and then you can answer and then we'll see if we're on the same page.
Okay.
So I would say, as a practicing audiologist, my first thought would be that direct access would make the biggest impact to me and to my patients. So having that physician order removed so that we don't have to have um, that piece of paper in hand before seeing a patient for medically necessary, that is where I personally think the biggest and fastest improvement could be. But I say that with the change in category going from diagnostic supplier to practitioner probably being a very close second. So I will turn that to you, Stephanie, and yeah, see what you think.
Sure. And I had them reversed, but almost still equally tied. And saying achieving the practitioner classification um, first, only because then you have a little bit of leverage, because then once you're classified there, you technically you can opt out. Whether that would happen or not happen, as we see the Medicare physician fee schedule and the proposed rule come out today, there are already some proposed cuts to reimbursement. And so I was thinking about it actually today, as it turns out. So I would put them almost tied. And my sense is too that getting both of those things accomplished in whatever order would almost automatically or most certainly allow for the third component, even if it weren't legislated. So if audiologists were to have reclassification as practitioners, my view is that at some point CMS would likely um, um, change some of the other classifications, and depending on how that got written by itself, may open up opportunities to provide the treatment services that Medicare covers, simply by getting out of that supplier category that puts you in a diagnostic only place just by virtue of being put there. Um, so, but we want them all. I'll say that. I'm gonna say we want them all. We want it all. Um, but
Sure,
sometimes you have to compromise in some of these packages. I think one important thing for people to know before we leave tonight is quite often you'll never see a bill like MASA pass as a standalone bill. It's going to be bundled up into a bigger Medicare package, and as such, it does have the potential to be changed with every iteration through a committee or through a package. And so there are sometimes compromises that get made there. But nonetheless, we think there are a lot of opportunities yet this year. So
sure. And I would say that I'm hoping we can compromise on practitioner and, maybe throw APCA in there. So
yeah, I'd be happy to
Um,
do that.
so yeah, so as you can see, I mean, I think everybody has a different view, and I think nobody is wrong, right? Because we're making educated decisions, which hopefully you are too. But however you feel like, at least the nice thing with this is that we have all three organizations on MASA, and so we all agree that regardless of if you support direct access or comprehensive benefits or reclassification to practitioner, that you can support one piece of legislation at this point in time. And let me
Sweet.
tell you, right, because I have a million things, and Stephanie knows I like to talk too. Um, Lobbying is so much fun. If you've never done it, it's nerve-wracking the first time. It's a hoot and a half the second time, and it's way more fun the more you do it. So if you haven't been to a lobby day, hopefully a lot of you were able to come out to DC and National Harbor last year when ADA did it, or maybe even in 2015. Some of the best things are getting to meet these people who are just normal humans. I had a million pictures I could have thrown up. I found one of Ms. Chayefsky and President Abel and a couple legislators there and people that I had lobbied with from Alaska. I mean, it's so much fun to do, and our lobbyists are so much fun to be around. And the chicken salad is amazing. And if you've ever heard me give a presentation, that is my favorite thing. And Prime now knows it, so my schedule's worked around that when I get to eat at lunch. So it's a lot of fun, and it can be just as much fun at your state level too. And when you're passionate about something, all you're doing is talking about audiology, and audiology I'm going to say 99.9997% better than anybody you will ever meet in any of these elected positions. So don't be afraid to go in as the expert like you typically are. So I will stop talking with that and turn it back to you.
Thank you. And with that, that does round out our session today. I'd like to thank everyone again for attending, and also would like to thank Dr. Spohr for her amazing insight in that presentation. There is not an audiologist that I can think of that knows more about legislation or regulatory issues than this one. If you have friends and colleagues who were unable to attend the webinar today, please let them know that the session has been recorded, and we'll send a link out to attendees after that's posted. And if you have any need for more information about future SATA practice management webinars, we actually have one more coming up next week with Dr. Richard Gans. Very excited about that. If you'd like to register, please visit audiologist.org/students. Thank you all and have a great evening.